In 2014, the quiet community of Maplewood, New Jersey, was shaken by a scandal that would become one of the state's most widely discussed cases involving an educator. Nicole Dufault, a 5-year-old language arts teacher at Columbia High School, was arrested and charged with multiple counts of misconduct involving her own students. What followed was a story that forced parents, schools, and lawmakers across the country to confront uncomfortable questions about trust, accountability, and how institutions protect the young people in their care. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please let me know where you saw this video. I will read it all and spread it around the world. Nicole Dufault had built a reputation as a personable, approachable teacher. Colleagues described her as dedicated, and parents saw her as someone who cared deeply about her students' success. She was also a mother of 2, balancing family life with her teaching career. On the surface, she appeared to be everything a parent would want in an educator: compassionate, energetic, and involved. But behind that image, investigators uncovered a disturbing pattern of misconduct that shattered her reputation and the faith families had placed in her. Between 2013 and 2014, prosecutors revealed Dufault had engaged in inappropriate conduct with 6 male students, most of them in the early years of high school. Some incidents occurred off campus, while others happened in or near school facilities, the very places where students were supposed to feel safe. The discovery horrified parents and stunned the entire community. Detectives began an extensive investigation after concerns were raised about her behavior. Testimonies from students confirmed that these were not isolated lapses in judgment, but repeated acts that reflected a serious abuse of authority. In September 2014, Nicole Dufault was arrested and charged with multiple counts of criminal sexual conduct and endangering the welfare of children. Her arrest sent shockwaves through Maplewood. Parents demanded answers. How could such misconduct happen under the supervision of a respected school district? What warning signs had been missed? Local and national media outlets quickly picked up the story, turning it into a focal point of public outrage and debate over school oversight and educator accountability. Prosecutors emphasized that this was far more than an instance of poor judgment. It was a clear abuse of power. Teachers hold positions of authority and trust, and the law recognizes that imbalance when it is violated. The charges against Dufault carried potentially decades-long prison terms, given both the number of students involved and the nature of the offenses. After years of legal proceedings, in 2018, Nicole Dufault pleaded guilty to charges involving 2 of the boys. Her plea spared the victims from having to testify in open court, but also served as a full acknowledgement of her actions. In 2019, she was sentenced to 15 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after serving a minimum of 12 years. Under New Jersey's sentencing laws, this meant she would spend most of that time behind bars before any review for early release. The judge's decision carried significant weight, both in its length and in what it symbolized. Prosecutors had argued that a strong sentence was necessary, given the number of victims and the repeated nature of the misconduct. The court agreed, emphasizing that the punishment had to reflect not only the harm done to the individual students, but also the need to preserve public confidence in schools. For Columbia High School, the aftermath was devastating. The school, long regarded for its academic excellence and community spirit, now faced intense scrutiny. Parents were angry and heartbroken. Students struggled to reconcile their memories of a once respected teacher with the disturbing truth that had come to light. The scandal cast a shadow over the institution, leaving both faculty and families questioning how such behavior could have gone unnoticed for so long. Nationally, the Dufault case became part of a larger conversation about gender and sentencing in educator misconduct cases. For years, critics had argued that female offenders often received lighter punishment than their male counterparts in similar situations. But Dufault's 15-year sentence was viewed by many as a sign that courts were beginning to take a firmer, more balanced stance, one that recognized that abuse of authority causes harm regardless of the offender's gender. Inside prison, Nicole Dufault's life changed dramatically. Her teaching license was permanently revoked, her reputation destroyed, and her 2 young sons were forced to grow up largely without her presence. Though she expressed remorse during her sentencing hearings, the impact of her actions extended far beyond herself. The students involved were left to process what had happened while still navigating the challenges of adolescence, a time when trust and guidance are crucial. Reflecting on her story today, the case of Nicole Dufault serves as a sobering reminder of the enormous responsibility that comes with being a teacher. Educators are entrusted not just with academics, but with the moral and emotional well-being of their students. When that trust is broken, the consequences ripple outward to the victims, their families, the school community, and even the broader public's confidence in education. Her case also raises difficult and necessary questions. How can schools better detect boundary violations before they escalate? What systems should be in place to encourage students to speak up safely? And when an educator breaks that sacred trust, how should society balance the goals of punishment, deterrence, and rehabilitation? For Maplewood, the scandal left deep scars. For the nation, it became part of a troubling pattern of educator misconduct that has continued to spark reflection and reform. And for Nicole Dufault, the consequences were undeniable. A long prison sentence, the loss of her family and career, and a lasting reminder of what happens when the boundaries of trust and power in education are crossed. In 2025, the city of San Diego, California, became the focus of one of the most shocking educator scandals in recent memory. At the center of the story was Jacqueline Ma, a highly respected elementary school teacher once celebrated as the district's Teacher of the Year in 2022. What made the case especially jarring was the deep contrast between her public image, that of a devoted, creative, and admired educator, and the disturbing truth that later emerged behind the scenes. Jacqueline Ma had long been regarded as the kind of teacher every parent hoped their child would have. She worked at Lincoln Acres Elementary School in the National School District, earning widespread praise for her innovative teaching methods and her ability to connect with students. Her colleagues admired her energy and compassion, and parents described her as dedicated and trustworthy. In 2022, her excellence was formally recognized when she was honored as Teacher of the Year for San Diego County, a title that symbolized both her success and her apparent integrity. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please let me know where you saw this video. I will read it all and spread it around the world. For a time, she was viewed as a role model, someone who embodied the very best of the teaching profession. But by 2023, that image began to unravel in the most devastating way imaginable. Law enforcement received a report suggesting that Ma was engaging in inappropriate behavior with some of her students. Investigators launched a detailed inquiry, and what they found deeply disturbed both the police and the community. Evidence revealed that Ma had cultivated exploitative relationships with 2 students, aged 11 and 12, using manipulation and secrecy to maintain control. Authorities also discovered illegal materials in her possession, adding a grave layer of evidence to the case. The revelations sent shockwaves through San Diego. Parents were heartbroken and furious, struggling to reconcile the award-winning teacher they once admired with the allegations of abuse now unfolding. Colleagues were equally stunned, expressing disbelief that someone they had trusted so completely could have betrayed her students and profession so profoundly. Prosecutors moved quickly, emphasizing the severity of the allegations and the abuse of authority at the heart of the case. They argued that Ma had not only violated her legal obligations, but also exploited the deep trust placed in educators. Defense attorneys pointed to her lack of prior criminal history, but those arguments could not outweigh the overwhelming evidence of deliberate and repeated wrongdoing. In 2025, Jacqueline Ma pleaded guilty to multiple felony counts, including child sexual abuse and possession of exploitative material. Her plea meant that a public trial and the re-traumatization of her victims could be avoided, but it also served as an acknowledgement of guilt. During her sentencing, prosecutors urged the court to impose a harsh penalty, citing both the lifelong impact on the victims and the importance of deterring similar crimes in the future. The judge agreed, sentencing Ma to 30 years to life in prison, one of the longest sentences ever handed down to a teacher in California. The ruling made national headlines and underscored a clear message. When educators abuse their power, the justice system will respond decisively. The consequences extended far beyond the courtroom. The National School District was left to confront the damage to its reputation and the immense emotional toll on its students and families. Parents demanded stronger safety measures, better background checks, and increased oversight to ensure that no educator could ever again exploit their position unchecked. Educators across the state felt the ripple effect. The case reignited urgent conversations about accountability in schools, the warning signs of grooming behavior, and the responsibility of both administrators and communities to intervene when something seems wrong. Nationally, Ma's story served as a chilling reminder that even those most publicly celebrated can sometimes hide dangerous secrets. Inside prison, Jacqueline Ma's transformation was complete. Her awards were stripped away, her teaching license permanently revoked, and her once promising career was reduced to a cautionary tale. The teacher who had once inspired admiration was now serving a decades-long sentence, her name forever associated with betrayal rather than achievement. For the victims and their families, the emotional wounds ran deep. No sentence, however long, could fully repair the damage done. The community was left grappling with the painful truth that even those honored as role models can fail in devastating ways, and that vigilance, not assumption, is the best safeguard for children's safety. The case of Jacqueline Ma continues to provoke difficult but necessary questions. How can schools and parents better identify early signs of grooming or manipulation? What systems of accountability must be strengthened to prevent such betrayals of trust? And perhaps most hauntingly, how could someone so publicly celebrated as a symbol of excellence have concealed such serious misconduct for so long? For San Diego, the scars of the case will take years to heal. For the nation, it remains a sobering reminder that the integrity of educators is the cornerstone of safe learning. And when that trust is broken, the consequences reach far beyond the classroom. And for Jacqueline Ma, the outcome is irreversible. From Teacher of the Year to a 30 years to life prison sentence, her fall from grace stands as one of the most devastating collapses of trust in modern education. In 2014, the quiet suburbs of Utah were shaken by a case that would capture national attention and spark conversations about trust, ethics, and accountability in education. Brienne Altice, a high school English teacher, was arrested and accused of engaging in misconduct with multiple students, a revelation that stunned both her community and the nation. What made the case especially unsettling was not only the number of students involved, but also her decision to continue one of those relationships even after being released on bail. The story of Brienne Altice became a cautionary tale, one that illustrated how easily professional boundaries can erode and how devastating the consequences can be when they do. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please let me know where you saw this video. I will read it all and spread it around the world. And don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel to be the first to receive notifications when there are new videos. Brienne had been a well-liked and respected educator at Davis High School, located just north of Salt Lake City. Born in 1979, she was often described as personable, confident, and stylish. Her students admired her for her easygoing nature and her ability to connect with them on a personal level, often breaking down the formal barriers that can exist between teachers and their students. To outsiders, she seemed to have everything: a solid career, community respect, and a bright future. But behind the classroom doors, lines began to blur. By 2013, rumors began circulating that Altice was becoming too close to some of her students. Those whispers became serious allegations when 3 students came forward with information that led to a criminal investigation. Because these individuals were under her direct supervision, Utah law classified her actions as felony offenses, recognizing the inherent imbalance of power between teacher and student. In January 2014, Altice was arrested, and the details revealed in court documents shocked the community. Prosecutors alleged that she had engaged in repeated misconduct with 3 male students, an accusation that left parents outraged and deeply concerned about the safety and integrity of their schools. The Davis School District immediately placed her on administrative leave. Families who had trusted the system to protect their children began questioning how such conduct could have gone unnoticed for so long. The case quickly became one of the most discussed in the region, not only because of its details, but also because it raised uncomfortable questions about oversight and accountability. As the legal process unfolded, Altice faced multiple felony charges that, if she had been convicted on all counts, could have resulted in decades behind bars. But the situation took another dramatic turn when it was discovered that she had violated her bail conditions by maintaining contact with one of the students while awaiting trial. That decision, made in defiance of strict court orders, resulted in additional charges and further eroded any remaining public sympathy. It also reinforced the perception that she was either unwilling or unable to respect legal boundaries, even after facing serious consequences. In 2015, Altice accepted a plea agreement, pleading guilty to 3 counts related to her misconduct. While the plea deal reduced the total number of charges, it still carried significant weight. In July 2015, she was sentenced to an indeterminate term of 2 to 30 years in prison under Utah's sentencing system, meaning the state parole board would decide her actual release date based on her rehabilitation and conduct behind bars. Altice began serving her sentence at the Utah State Prison, and for a while, it seemed as though the case had reached its conclusion. But her name continued to appear in headlines, both locally and nationally, as people debated how the justice system should handle female offenders in cases involving authority figures and minors. Her case echoed far beyond Utah, joining a string of similar incidents across the country that prompted difficult discussions about boundaries and the abuse of professional trust. In 2019, after serving just over 4 years of her sentence, Altice appeared before the Utah Board of Pardons and Parole. During her hearing, she expressed remorse, acknowledging the emotional harm she had caused to her students, their families, and the broader community. The board granted her parole, and she was released later that same year. Her early release reignited public debate. Some viewed it as a sign of rehabilitation and second chances, while others questioned whether the punishment fit the severity of the misconduct. Parents continued to ask how such a breach of trust could occur within a school setting and how systems could be improved to detect and prevent similar cases before they happen. The consequences of Altice's actions extended far beyond her own life. Her career was destroyed, her teaching license revoked, and her reputation permanently marked. For the community of Davis County, the case left a lasting scar, one that forced schools, administrators, and families to confront the uncomfortable truth that even trusted educators are capable of serious ethical violations. Across the country, her case was cited in training programs and education reform discussions as an example of the critical importance of maintaining professional boundaries. It also fueled an ongoing conversation about gender bias, why female offenders are sometimes portrayed as troubled or misguided, while male offenders in similar cases are often depicted as predatory. Looking back, the story of Brienne Altice remains a complex and troubling one. She was a teacher who inspired admiration and trust, only to betray both in a way that left lasting damage. Her early parole and efforts to rebuild her life raised difficult questions about justice, redemption, and whether rehabilitation can ever fully restore what has been lost. Her case challenges us to ask, how can schools better identify warning signs of misconduct before boundaries are crossed? How should the justice system balance punishment with the potential for rehabilitation? And perhaps most importantly, what lasting effects do such betrayals of trust leave on the students and communities involved? For Utah and for the nation, the case of Brienne Altice endures as a sobering reminder that the line between mentorship and misconduct must never be blurred, and that safeguarding trust within education is a responsibility shared by everyone. In 2005, A Tennessee schoolteacher went from respected educator to national headline in a matter of days. Her name was Pamela Rogers Turner, and her story became one of the most widely discussed educator misconduct cases of its time. What began as quiet rumors in a small-town gymnasium would spiral into multiple courtroom appearances, repeated prison sentences, and a story that continued to draw attention because of one woman's repeated refusal or inability to stop crossing the same line. Pamela Rogers Turner was born and raised in Tennessee, where she built a career in education and athletics. Known for her upbeat personality and enthusiasm for sports, she connected easily with her students as a physical education teacher. Married to a local coach, she appeared to have the kind of stable life many admired: a respected job, a supportive spouse, and a trusted reputation in her community. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please let me know where you saw this video. I will read it all and spread it around the world. But behind that picture of stability, boundaries began to blur. In early 2005, rumors started circulating among students and parents in McMinnville, Tennessee. Concerns grew that Pamela had developed an inappropriate relationship with a 13-year-old student, a claim that, at first, seemed almost impossible to believe. When investigators began looking into the situation, they found digital evidence, including text messages and other exchanges, that confirmed a pattern of misconduct and professional boundary violations. For the small town of McMinnville, the revelations were devastating. A teacher trusted to educate and protect children had violated one of the most fundamental rules of her profession. Prosecutors moved swiftly, filing over 24 charges, including counts of exploitation and abuse of authority. The gravity of the case was magnified by the student's age, just 13 years old. In August 2005, Pamela Rogers pleaded no contest to 4 counts and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. However, she served only 9 months before being released on probation under strict conditions, the most important of which was that she have no contact with the student. For most people, this would have been the end of the story, an opportunity to rebuild, learn, and avoid further harm. But within a year, Pamela was arrested again, this time for violating her probation. Investigators discovered she had been sending text messages, videos, and photographs to the same student she had been ordered to avoid. The violation was serious and undeniable. It demonstrated not only a disregard for the law but also an inability to recognize the lasting harm her actions had caused. The court responded decisively. In this second sentencing, leniency was no longer an option. Pamela Rogers Turner received an additional 7-year prison sentence for breaking her probation and continuing contact with the minor. This second fall from grace made her case stand out across the nation, an example of how repeated violations can erase any possibility of redemption in the eyes of the public. By the time she was released in 2012, Pamela had spent much of her 30s behind bars. Her teaching career was gone, her marriage had ended, and her reputation was irreparably damaged. What could have been a single, tragic mistake had turned into a pattern of repeated choices that deepened her downfall. Unlike many teacher misconduct cases that fade after sentencing, Pamela's repeated arrests kept her name in national headlines for years. News outlets revisited her story as an example of how probation violations lead to harsher sentences and how repeated defiance of court orders undermines public confidence in both education and justice. The case forced communities to confront difficult questions. How do systems designed to protect minors ensure accountability? And what happens when a person refuses to respect those safeguards, even after facing serious punishment? For McMinnville, the impact was lasting. Parents were left to question how such behavior could have gone unnoticed for so long and how to restore trust in educators who work so closely with children. Nationally, the case became part of a larger conversation about gender, justice, and accountability, with many asking whether female offenders are treated differently than men in similar circumstances. Reflecting on Pamela Rogers Turner's story offers a sobering reminder of how choices compound. She was given multiple chances to uphold professional standards, to rebuild her life after her first conviction, and to follow court-ordered boundaries. Each time, She made decisions that led her further into scandal and imprisonment. By the time of her final release, she was no longer simply a teacher who had made one mistake. She had become a case study in the consequences of repeated boundary violations and the loss of public trust that follows. Her story endures not because of sensationalism, but because it highlights a difficult truth about human behavior, the challenge of change, and the consequences of ignoring accountability. It leaves us with an essential question. Why do some individuals repeat the very actions that have already cost them everything? Is it defiance, denial, or an inability to accept the boundaries that society must uphold to protect its most vulnerable? In 2024, a small town in Tennessee was thrust into the national spotlight after the arrest of Alyssa McCommon, a fourth-grade teacher whose case would become one of the most disturbing educator scandals in recent memory. What began as quiet suspicion soon unraveled into a far-reaching investigation that revealed years of betrayal, manipulation, and abuse of trust, a story that shocked even veteran law enforcement officers. Alyssa McCommon had been a familiar figure in the Covington school district since 2011. In her late 30s, married and a mother herself, she was viewed as a caring and dependable teacher. Parents trusted her completely. Colleagues described her as friendly, professional, and deeply invested in her students' success. For more than a decade, she seemed to represent everything a good educator should be until the truth began to surface. In 2023, authorities received a tip suggesting that McCommon was engaging in inappropriate behavior with some of her students. At first, few could believe it, but as detectives began investigating, they uncovered troubling evidence that revealed a long-running pattern of misconduct. Multiple students came forward with accounts that painted a devastating picture, one that exposed a serious abuse of power and a failure of the systems designed to protect children. As the investigation widened, law enforcement identified as many as 21 potential victims, ranging in age from early teens to late high school. The scale of the allegations was unlike anything local investigators had encountered before. The situation became even more serious when it was confirmed that McCommon had given birth to a child connected to one of the students, a fact that underscored the far-reaching and deeply personal consequences of her actions. By the time of her arrest, McCommon faced dozens of felony counts, each representing a serious breach of professional and moral responsibility. For the small community of Tipton County, the revelations were devastating. Parents questioned how such conduct could have continued for so many years without detection. School administrators and teachers struggled to understand how warning signs had gone unnoticed. In 2024, McCommon pleaded guilty to multiple felony charges. Her plea spared the victims from the emotional trauma of testifying in court, but confirmed the scale and gravity of her crimes. During sentencing, prosecutors urged the judge to impose a severe penalty, arguing that the case represented one of the most egregious betrayals of trust ever seen in a Tennessee classroom. They emphasized that her behavior was not a single lapse in judgment, but a deliberate and repeated pattern of exploitation. The court agreed. Alyssa McCommon was sentenced to 25 years in state prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring that she would spend much of her life behind bars. It was one of the harshest sentences ever imposed on a teacher in the United States. The judge's decision reflected the magnitude of harm caused and the need to send a clear message. Those who exploit positions of authority over children will face severe and lasting consequences. For the victims and their families, the ruling brought a measure of justice, though no sentence could truly undo the harm. For the town of Covington, the case shattered the sense of security that had long defined their schools. A place once viewed as safe and nurturing had become the setting for one of the state's most shocking breaches of trust. The impact extended far beyond Tennessee. Nationally, the McCommon case reignited debates about accountability, oversight, and gender bias in sentencing. In past incidents, critics had often argued that female educators received lighter punishments than men for similar offenses. But McCommon's 25-year sentence with no chance of parole stood as a definitive response to those criticisms, underscoring that the law applies equally, regardless of gender. Prosecutors themselves stated that the verdict was intended to send a message. Child abuse by any educator will be met with full force under the law. Inside prison, Alyssa McCommon's life changed entirely. The teacher and mother, once respected in her community, now faced decades of confinement. Her career was destroyed, her teaching license revoked, and her reputation permanently erased. The consequences of her actions rippled far beyond her own life, affecting her family, her students, and an entire community left grappling with betrayal. For the victims, the consequences were far more profound. They were left to confront emotional scars that no legal outcome could fully heal. Parents described the process of rebuilding trust as slow and painful, a reminder of how deeply such misconduct can impact the lives of young people and their families. Reflecting on this case raises difficult but necessary questions. How can schools better detect signs of misconduct before it escalates? What systems of accountability must be strengthened to ensure that teachers are monitored and supported appropriately? And perhaps most importantly, how do we as a society support the victims, ensuring they find healing, justice, and a sense of safety again? For Tennessee, the case of Alyssa McCommon will remain a defining example of betrayal within the education system, a story that revealed not only the depths of one teacher's deception, but also the urgent need for vigilance in protecting students. For the nation, it serves as a stark reminder that no reputation, accolade, or public image can shield someone from accountability when they violate the ethical and moral foundations of their profession. And for Alyssa McCommon herself, the consequences are irreversible. Her 25-year prison sentence ensures that her name will be remembered not for her years in the classroom, but for one of the darkest and most sobering scandals in modern American education. How do we prevent the next betrayal, and what will it take for communities to truly rebuild the trust once broken? In 2019, the state of Arizona found itself at the center of one of the most widely discussed educator misconduct cases in the nation. At the heart of it was Brittany Zamora, a sixth-grade teacher whose name became synonymous with broken trust, legal consequences, and one of the harshest sentences ever handed down to a female teacher in U.S. history. What made the case so striking was not just the seriousness of the charges, but the magnitude of the punishment. 20 years in prison without the possibility of parole. Born in 1991, Zamora appeared to be the embodiment of a young, successful educator. After earning her degree in education, she joined Las Brisas Academy in Goodyear, a suburb of Phoenix. She was married to her longtime partner and, by all appearances, had a stable personal life. Colleagues described her as passionate, positive, and committed to creating an enjoyable classroom environment. Parents trusted her, and students seemed to respond well to her teaching style. On the surface, she had all the elements of a bright and promising future, but in 2018, that image collapsed almost overnight. Concerns began to surface about her interactions with a student, and what started as quiet suspicion quickly grew into a serious investigation. Authorities discovered that Zamora's conduct had gone far beyond professional boundaries, and, even more disturbing, that some incidents had taken place during school hours and inside her classroom. For parents, the revelation was devastating. The person entrusted with protecting and guiding their children had instead violated one of the most fundamental rules of trust in education. The discovery came after parents noticed troubling signs and contacted school administrators. Once police began investigating, they found digital communications that confirmed the misconduct. These messages became key evidence, showing the repeated and deliberate nature of Zamora's actions. The revelations shocked the entire Goodyear community and quickly transformed a local story into a national headline. In March 2018, Brittany Zamora was arrested and charged with multiple felony counts, including sexual conduct with a minor and related offenses. Prosecutors treated the case with the utmost seriousness, emphasizing that it represented a clear abuse of authority. From the very beginning, they made it clear they would seek a lengthy prison sentence, arguing that this was a crime that demanded accountability. The emotional impact on the community was profound. Parents expressed disbelief and anger, questioning how such behavior could go unnoticed in a monitored school environment. For many, the case became a wake-up call about the need for greater oversight in schools and more open communication between parents, teachers, and administrators. In 2019, Zamora accepted a plea deal rather than face trial on dozens of separate charges. She pleaded guilty to sexual conduct with a minor and several related offenses. During sentencing, the presiding judge emphasized the gravity of her actions and the necessity of protecting children from harm. The court imposed the maximum penalty allowed under the plea agreement, 20 years in prison, with no eligibility for early release. The sentence ensured that Zamora would spend the majority of her adult life behind bars. It made national news not only for its severity, but also because it represented one of the longest prison terms ever given to a female educator in such a case. Supporters of the decision argued that it sent a powerful message that justice should be equal, regardless of gender, and that educators who abuse their authority would face serious consequences. Critics, however, questioned whether the extensive media coverage surrounding the case had influenced public perception or the outcome itself. For the community of Goodyear, the aftermath was painful. Parents felt betrayed. Students were left struggling with the unwanted attention brought to their school, and administrators faced difficult questions about prevention and accountability. Many educators in the area described the experience as a sobering reminder that vigilance and transparency are essential to maintaining a safe learning environment. Inside prison, Brittany Zamora's life changed completely. The once energetic teacher who had been celebrated for her enthusiasm was now serving a sentence that would keep her incarcerated until middle age. Her marriage ended, her teaching license was permanently revoked, and her career, along with her reputation, was gone forever. For the victim and his family, the emotional toll was immeasurable. No legal outcome could fully undo the trauma or restore the trust that had been broken. The community, too, continued to wrestle with the aftermath, questioning how a person who appeared so dedicated to education could make such devastating choices. Nationally, the Zamora case reignited debates about sentencing, gender dynamics, and institutional responsibility. Some argued that her punishment set a new standard for equality in the justice system, while others believed it reflected a need for greater consistency in how such cases are handled, regardless of the teacher's background or public image. Her 20-year sentence became a benchmark, frequently cited in discussions about the justice system's handling of educators who abuse their authority. It also became a teaching moment, a stark example of how easily professional boundaries can blur and how devastating the consequences can be when they are crossed. Reflecting on Brittany Zamora's story raises difficult but essential questions. How can schools detect warning signs before misconduct occurs? How can parents and administrators ensure accountability while still fostering trust between teachers and students? And how should justice balance punishment, prevention, and rehabilitation in cases that strike so deeply at the foundation of education? For Goodyear, Arizona, the scars of the case remain. For the nation, Zamora's conviction stands as a cautionary tale, a reminder that the role of an educator carries immense responsibility, and that when that trust is broken, the consequences can extend far beyond the classroom. And for Brittany Zamora herself, the price was profound. Not just the loss of her career and reputation, but 2 decades of freedom, a life defined by the consequences of choices that can never be undone. In 2015, a quiet Catholic high school in Michigan became the center of a story that shocked both its community and the nation. Katherine Rondeau, a Spanish teacher at Bishop Foley High School in Madison Heights, was accused of violating the trust placed in her by her students, colleagues, and the families who believed in the values of the institution. What began as a local scandal soon sparked a broader discussion about accountability, fairness, and the equal application of justice in cases involving authority figures and minors. At first glance, Katherine seemed like the picture of an ideal educator. In her early 30s, she was highly educated, fluent in Spanish, and well regarded by her students. Those who knew her described her as approachable, engaging, and enthusiastic about her subject, the kind of teacher who made learning feel personal and enjoyable. For many parents, enrolling their children in a respected private Catholic school like Bishop Foley came with the assurance that their sons and daughters would be guided by moral discipline, academic excellence, and faith-based principles. But in 2014, that image shattered. Authorities discovered that Katherine had engaged in misconduct involving a 5-year-old student, one of her pupils. The incidents, investigators later revealed, had occurred inside the very classrooms where she was meant to teach. The revelation was deeply unsettling, not only because of the breach of professional boundaries, but also because it took place in an institution grounded in moral values. The Oakland County Sheriff's Office launched an immediate investigation, and prosecutors moved quickly to file charges. Katherine was arrested and charged with multiple counts of third-degree criminal sexual conduct. Under Michigan law, the student's age just 15 made the charges especially serious. The law recognized the inherent power imbalance between a teacher and a student, and that imbalance left no room for ambiguity. As the case moved toward trial, Katherine made the decision to plead guilty in 2015 to one count of third-degree criminal sexual conduct. Her guilty plea meant she acknowledged her actions, but it did not lessen the severity of her crime or the weight of its impact on her victim and the community. The question before the court was not whether she was guilty, but how justice should be delivered in a way that balanced her acceptance of responsibility with the need to uphold accountability and deterrence. During sentencing, both sides presented their arguments. The defense asked for leniency, citing her lack of prior criminal history and her decision to admit guilt rather than force the victim to testify. But prosecutors insisted that the seriousness of the crime demanded a firm response. The presiding judge, Nancy Grant, addressed an issue that often arises in similar cases, whether gender influences punishment. Judge Grant made it clear that in her courtroom, it would not. She stated that if the situation were reversed, if a male teacher had committed the same acts with a female student, society would expect significant prison time. Justice, she emphasized, must be consistent and impartial. In June 2015, the court sentenced Katherine Rondeau to 6 to 15 years in prison, a decision that drew attention statewide. Many viewed it as a landmark moment, a clear declaration that crimes involving authority figures and minors would be treated with equal seriousness, regardless of gender. At a time when some female offenders in similar cases had received probation or reduced sentences, this ruling stood out as firm and unflinching. Rondeau began serving her sentence in the Michigan Department of Corrections, while her story continued to resonate long after the trial ended. For Bishop Foley High School, the case was devastating. The institution, proud of its Catholic identity and its close-knit reputation, now faced public scrutiny and the difficult task of rebuilding trust. Parents felt betrayed, questioning how such conduct could have occurred in a school meant to represent both education and faith. For the victim and his family, the emotional toll was far greater. They were forced to navigate the trauma of the situation while coping with the intense media attention it attracted. Classmates and alumni, too, expressed disbelief that a teacher they had once respected could have caused such lasting harm. Nationally, the case became part of a larger conversation about gender bias in sentencing. For years, critics had argued that female educators accused of similar crimes were often portrayed as misguided or emotionally unstable, while male teachers in equivalent circumstances were described as predatory and received harsher punishment. Katherine Rondeau's 6 to 1 5-year sentence became a counterexample, a statement that justice, when fairly applied, must transcend societal expectations and stereotypes. Judge Grant's remarks during sentencing were quoted widely in the media, reinforcing the principle that justice should be blind to gender, emotion, or public opinion, focused solely on facts, harm, and accountability. Over time, as public attention faded, Rondeau's case remained a reference point in discussions of ethics, education, and justice. Her sentence ensured that she would serve several years in prison before being eligible for parole. Her teaching career was permanently revoked, and her name became linked to one of the most infamous teacher misconduct cases in Michigan's history. Reflecting on the story of Katherine Rondeau leaves us with powerful and uncomfortable questions. What leads a trusted educator to cross a boundary so deeply damaging? How can schools strengthen oversight to prevent such breaches before they happen? And when justice is served, what does true accountability and eventual redemption look like? For the community of Bishop Foley High School, and for educators everywhere, her case stands as a solemn reminder that trust is sacred, and once it is broken, the consequences extend far beyond any single classroom. When news broke in 2004 about the arrest of Deborah Lafave, the story spread across the United States almost instantly. A middle school teacher from Florida had been accused of engaging in misconduct with a 4-year-old student, a revelation that shocked both the local community and the wider public. But what made this case especially controversial was not only the nature of the crime, but also who she was: young, blonde, and conventionally attractive. This combination of factors made her case one of the most widely discussed and debated teacher misconduct stories of the early 2000s. The mix of crime, notoriety, and courtroom drama ensured that her name would dominate headlines. Beyond the facts, the case fueled discussions about justice, punishment, and gender bias, both in the media and within the legal system itself. Deborah Lafave was born in Riverview, Florida, in 1980. She grew up outgoing, ambitious, and well-liked by those who knew her. After graduating high school, she earned a degree in education and later married a police officer. By her early 20s, she seemed to have built the perfect life: a respected teaching position in Tampa, a stable marriage, and admiration from students who described her as engaging and approachable. On the surface, she appeared to be a model teacher with a promising future, but beneath that image, things were beginning to unravel. By 2004, her marriage was under strain, and she was dealing with personal and emotional challenges. During this turbulent period, Deborah crossed professional and legal boundaries, engaging in inappropriate conduct with one of her 4-year-old students. The situation came to light when the student confided in his mother, who immediately contacted authorities. The investigation moved quickly. Police gathered witness statements, testimony, and digital evidence that supported the allegations. In June 2004, Lafave was arrested and charged with multiple felony counts under Florida law. Her marriage to a law enforcement officer only intensified the sense of betrayal felt by many. As the case developed, public opinion split sharply. Some expressed anger that a trusted educator had violated such a sacred professional boundary. Others criticized the media's intense focus on her appearance, arguing that it overshadowed the seriousness of the charges. These contrasting views led to deeper questions. Would this case have been handled the same if she didn't fit a particular image? Would the sentence have been as light if the teacher were male? In 2005, Deborah Lafave reached a plea agreement that stunned the public. She pleaded guilty to 2 counts of lewd or lascivious battery, and, instead of prison, received 3 years of house arrest, followed by 7 years of probation. Prosecutors justified the deal as a way to spare the victim from the trauma of testifying in court. However, many felt that the sentence was far too lenient for the severity of the offenses. Critics argued that gender and appearance may have influenced both the public narrative and the legal outcome. The story didn't end there. In 2011, Lafave was accused of violating her probation after reportedly having contact with a 17-year-old co-worker, a breach of the strict no-contact terms imposed by the court. As a result, her probation was revoked, and she served a brief term in county jail. By the time of her release, her teaching license had been permanently revoked, her marriage had ended, and the career she had once worked so hard to build was gone. The national media coverage surrounding her case remained intense. Major outlets such as CNN and People magazine continued to revisit the story for years. For many, the Lafave case became symbolic of the need for clearer and more consistent sentencing guidelines for educators who violate professional and legal boundaries with students. Others saw it as a reflection of how media portrayal can distort public perception and, in some cases, even influence justice. After completing her sentence, Deborah Lafave largely withdrew from public life. She has avoided interviews and chosen to live quietly, though her name occasionally resurfaces in follow-up reports or retrospectives about the wave of teacher misconduct cases that dominated headlines in the mid-2000s. That wave permanently changed how the public viewed trust and accountability in education. Reflecting on her story today, the questions raised by Deborah Lafave's case remain deeply relevant. How should the justice system balance compassion for victims with appropriate punishment for offenders? Did the public's fascination with her appearance shape the way her actions were judged? And what lessons can schools, parents, and communities take from cases where trust and responsibility are so profoundly broken? Whatever the answers, Deborah Lafave's name endures as a reminder of how fragile professional boundaries can be, and how quickly the violation of that trust can destroy not only a career, but an entire community's sense of safety. In the mid-1990s, the story of Mary Kay Letourneau stunned the nation in a way few cases ever had. She wasn't just a teacher, she was a wife, a mother of 4, and a respected member of her Seattle area community. Yet her name would soon become synonymous with one of the most widely discussed educator-student scandals in American history. What made it so shocking was not only the nature of the relationship itself, but the ages involved, the repeated violations of court orders, and the fact that, years later, the story would evolve in ways few could have imagined. Mary Kay Letourneau was born in 1962 into a large Catholic family with deep political roots. Her father had served as a state legislator, and her upbringing reflected discipline, faith, and traditional values. She attended Arizona State University, where she met and married Steve Letourneau. The couple had 4 children and eventually settled near Seattle, Washington. By the early 1990s, Mary Kay had built a solid reputation as a caring and dynamic elementary school teacher, someone deeply invested in her students' success. But behind that professional image, her personal life was beginning to fracture. Her marriage was reportedly strained, marked by emotional distance and allegations of infidelity. It was within this vulnerable period that she met Vili Foilau, a 2-year-old student in her 6th grade class. What began as mentorship and encouragement, something that might appear harmless, at first slowly crossed into deeply inappropriate territory. By 1996, the two were engaged in a relationship that, under Washington state law, constituted statutory sexual misconduct. Mary Kay was 34 years old. Vili was only 12. When the truth came to light, the public reaction was immediate and intense. In March 1997, Mary Kay gave birth to a daughter fathered by Vili. That same year, she was arrested and charged with 2 counts of second-degree child rape. Initially, the legal system showed an unusual degree of leniency. In August 1997, she accepted a plea deal that significantly reduced her sentence. She was given 6 months in county jail, with 3 months suspended and ordered to undergo treatment. A strict no-contact order prohibited any interaction with Vili, yet soon after her release, Mary Kay violated that order. In February 1998, police found the two together in a parked vehicle, and she was once again pregnant, carrying their 2nd child. This violation had serious consequences. Her plea agreement was revoked, and she was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. In October 1998, she gave birth to her 2nd daughter while incarcerated, a situation that highlighted the extraordinary and troubling nature of the case. Mary Kay served her full sentence and was released in August 2004. What followed became the most controversial chapter of all. Within a year, she and Vili Foilau, now an adult, publicly reunited. Despite the years of legal battles, public outrage, and extensive media coverage, both maintained that their relationship was genuine and based on love. In 2005, they married in a highly publicized ceremony attended by hundreds and covered worldwide by the press. The marriage drew widespread criticism. How could a relationship that began when one party was a child ever be viewed as legitimate? Still, for over a decade, they lived together as husband and wife, raising their 2 daughters. The public reaction to the case was enormous. In the late 1990 seconds, Letourneau's story dominated tabloid headlines, talk shows, and nightly news broadcasts. The combination of her status as a trusted teacher, the extreme age difference, and her repeated defiance of court orders made the case one of the most infamous of its era. It also ignited broader discussions about gender, power, and accountability. Many questioned whether the media's portrayal of Letourneau was shaped by societal biases, asking if a male teacher in the same situation would have been treated as sympathetically. Others argued that the case was handled with appropriate seriousness, emphasizing the emotional and psychological harm such relationships can cause to minors. Over the years, the couple's lives continued to draw public curiosity. They appeared in interviews and documentaries, attempting to explain the complexities of their past while raising their family. Yet for many, the image of a teacher marrying her former student whose relationship had begun when he was only a child remained deeply unsettling. In 2017, Ville Foileau filed for legal separation, though later reports indicated that their relationship had remained close in some form. Then, in 2020, Mary Kay Letourneau passed away at the age of 58 after a battle with cancer. Ville and their daughters were reportedly by her side at the time of her death. Her passing marked the end of a story that had spanned more than 2 decades, one filled with controversy, emotion, and moral questions that still resonate today. For some, it stands as a cautionary tale about blurred boundaries and the profound responsibilities that come with positions of trust. For others, it raises questions about forgiveness, rehabilitation, and the lasting impact of choices made under extraordinary circumstances. The Letourneau case forces us to reflect on the intersection of power, consent, and accountability. How should society reconcile compassion with justice when a relationship begins in violation of the law but continues into adulthood? And what does true rehabilitation mean for both the offender and the victim when their lives remain intertwined for decades afterward? She seemed like the kind of teacher every student remembered fondly, young, energetic, and approachable. Brittany Collips had a gift for making her classroom feel welcoming and inspiring, a space where learning felt personal rather than intimidating. But in 2011, this Texas high school teacher's private life would come under scrutiny in a case that would shake her community and ignite a nationwide conversation about ethics, boundaries, and trust in education. What began as admiration for a well-liked teacher turned into one of the most widely discussed cases involving inappropriate educator-student relationships in recent history. At the time, Brittany appeared to have an ordinary, stable life. She was married, a mother of 3, and a military veteran who transitioned to teaching at Kennedale High School, near Fort Worth, Texas. Her colleagues and students described her as caring and dependable, the kind of teacher parents trusted without hesitation. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please let me know where you saw this video. I will read it all and spread it around the world. That trust would soon be tested. In the spring of 2011, reports began to surface, suggesting that Collips had engaged in intimate relationships with several male students from her school, all of whom were legally adults. These encounters allegedly occurred at her home while her family was away. What made this case particularly striking was not only that the individuals involved were her students, but also the number of them. Investigators later confirmed that at least 5 students had been part of these encounters, turning a local issue into a statewide scandal. The story began to unravel much the way many modern scandals do, through whispers and rumors spreading among students. Word eventually reached school administrators, who contacted local authorities. Once the police investigation began, the students involved came forward, confirming the relationships. Digital evidence, including phone records and text exchanges, was reportedly found to support their claims. For the small community of Kennedale, The revelations were both shocking and deeply disappointing. A teacher once viewed as a mentor and role model now faced accusations of violating professional and ethical boundaries. Prosecutors emphasized that under Texas law, educators are strictly prohibited from engaging in sexual relationships with students enrolled at their school, regardless of age. This law exists to recognize the inherent imbalance of power between a teacher and their students, a safeguard designed to protect young adults from potential exploitation. The defense argued that the relationships were consensual, but as prosecutors explained, consent was not the central issue. The law's focus was on the abuse of authority and breach of professional responsibility. When the case went to trial in 2012, the courtroom testimony provided an unsettling look at how trust and influence can blur boundaries when not handled responsibly. Media coverage was intense, drawing national attention to the case's complexity. The prosecution presented evidence showing that Collips had used her role as an educator to establish relationships that quickly crossed professional lines. Testimonies from students illustrated how admiration and authority can sometimes evolve into dangerous gray areas. The jury ultimately found her guilty on 16 counts of improper relationships with students. In May 2012, Collips was sentenced to 5 years in prison. The prosecution urged the court to send a strong message about accountability and the duty educators have toward their students. Some in the public believed the sentence was lenient, given the number of charges. Others viewed it as fair, considering the students' ages. Collips served roughly half of her term before being released in 2016. Following her release, she withdrew from public life, avoiding the media spotlight. Yet the case continued to serve as a powerful reminder for educators, students, and parents alike that professionalism, boundaries, and accountability form the foundation of trust in education. The ripple effects of this case were felt far beyond one Texas high school. Parents began asking harder questions about how such situations could go unnoticed. Educators across the country revisited training on professional ethics and appropriate conduct. For many, this became a cautionary tale of how easily admiration and trust can be misinterpreted or misused when clear boundaries are not maintained. Ultimately, Brittany Collips's story remains one of reflection on human vulnerability, the pressures within the teaching profession, and the profound responsibility that comes with guiding young lives. It leaves us with a question worth asking. How can schools better protect both students and teachers from situations where personal boundaries blur into professional misconduct before irreversible damage is done?